At Havenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a young rescued bobcat was nearing the day he would finally be released back into the forests of Oregon. Wild at heart, he had spent months regaining his strength under careful rehabilitation, destined to return to a life of freedom. But everything changed when Snowflake, a fragile, trembling white kitten, arrived at the center. From the moment they met, the bobcat's instincts shifted in an extraordinary way. Instead of keeping his distance, he became Snowflake's fierce protector, curling around him day and night, growling low whenever anyone approached. The staff, seasoned in working with wild animals, were stunned. Despite extensive preparations when release day came, the bobcat refused to leave Snowflake's side, pacing anxiously and calling out whenever they were separated. What was driving this wild creature to act so strangely? And why did this solitary hunter seem desperate to protect a creature that wasn't his own kind? What the vets discovered would not only change their lives forever, but would also bring tears to the eyes of even the most hardened veterinarians. The soft glow of dawn crept through the forest canopy as Dr. Eleanor Winters made her morning rounds at Havenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Located in the lush wilderness just outside Bend, Oregon, the center had been her life's work for nearly 20 years. At 58, Eleanor had the weathered hands and sun-lined face of someone who had spent decades working outdoors. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and behind her wire-rimmed glasses, her eyes carried both the weariness of someone who had witnessed too much animal suffering and the determined spark of someone who had saved countless lives. "How's our patient in enclosure 12?" she asked Tom Redford, the center's head wildlife rehabilitator. Tom, a former forest ranger with 30 years of experience, looked up from his work. "The bobcat's recovering faster than we expected. The leg wound is healing cleanly. I'd say another 2 weeks and he'll be ready for release." The bobcat in question had been discovered 3 months earlier by a hiker, caught in an illegal trap that left a deep gash across his hind leg. By the time he arrived at Havenwood, he was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and battling infection. The staff had named him Wilder. Approximately 2 years old and in the prime of his life, Wilder had the characteristic tufted ears and muscular build of his species. His russet fur was marked with black streaks and spots, providing perfect camouflage for his native woodland habitat. Unlike many rescued predators who grew somewhat accustomed to human presence during rehabilitation, Wilder remained fiercely independent, watching his caretakers with wary amber eyes. "He's still completely wild," Tom had remarked the previous week, which is exactly as it should be for a successful release. What neither Eleanor nor Tom could have anticipated was how dramatically their carefully laid plans would change by nightfall. The call came just after sunset. Dr. Melissa Jane, the center's on-call veterinarian, answered on the third ring. "I found a kitten," a young trembling voice said. "It's really small, and I think it's dying. The animal hospital in town said they're full and to call you." Melissa sighed. Domestic animals weren't technically within their mandate, but she couldn't bring herself to turn away an animal in need. "Bring it in. I'll meet you at the reception building." 15 minutes later, Melissa was carefully examining the smallest kitten she had seen in her 12 years of veterinary practice. The creature was a scrap of white fur, no bigger than her palm, with blue eyes still clouded by infancy. Its tiny body was racked with tremors, and a concerning wheeze accompanied each breath. Sophie Williams, the 14-year-old girl who had brought him in, hovered anxiously nearby with tears streaming down her freckled face. "I found him under our porch. There was no mama cat anywhere." Melissa's examination confirmed her initial concerns. The kitten was severely undernourished, hypothermic, and suffering from a respiratory infection that, if left untreated much longer, would certainly prove fatal. At approximately 3 weeks old, he should still have been nursing from his mother. "We'll do everything we can," she assured Sophie. After taking their contact information, Melissa carried the tiny patient to the treatment room. She placed him on a heated pad, administered fluids for dehydration, and started him on antibiotics. "Does he have a name?" asked Kayla Martinez, the center's newest staff member. Melissa looked down at the trembling white form. Sophie called him Snowflake. By morning, Snowflake's condition had stabilized but remained precarious. The center operated according to strict protocols, particularly regarding the separation of species. Wild animals undergoing rehabilitation were kept isolated from domestic animals to prevent disease transmission or habituation that might compromise their eventual return to the wild, which is why what happened during feeding time that afternoon defied all explanation. Kayla was carrying Snowflake's incubator to a treatment area when she passed Wilder's enclosure. The bobcat, normally aloof and disinterested in center activities, suddenly sprang to attention. He approached the mesh front of his enclosure with unusual intensity, nostrils flaring as he caught the kitten's scent. What happened next caused Kayla to nearly drop the incubator in shock. Instead of the typical predatory response one might expect from a wild feline encountering a smaller, vulnerable cat, Wilder began making a soft churring sound, a vocalization bobcats typically reserve for their own young. "Dr. Winters, Tom, you need to see this," Kayla called out. Eleanor arrived first, her expression shifting from annoyance to bewilderment as she observed Wilder's behavior. The bobcat was now pacing along the edge of his enclosure, eyes fixed on the kitten, making sounds none of them had heard from him before. "Move the kitten away," she instructed. As Kayla stepped back, Wilder became visibly agitated, pawing at the mesh and vocalizing more loudly. "Bring him closer again," Tom suggested. When Kayla carefully moved Snowflake's incubator nearer, Wilder immediately calmed, sitting directly opposite the glass front, his eyes never leaving the tiny white form. "I've never seen anything like this," Tom murmured. 20 years working with bobcats, and I've never seen one show interest in a domestic cat except as prey." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "It doesn't make sense from an evolutionary or behavioral standpoint." "Is he seeing Snowflake as prey?" Kayla asked nervously. Eleanor studied Wilder's body language, the relaxed posture, the absence of predatory stillness, the continued soft vocalizations. "No, this isn't predatory behavior. It's almost protective." "Take Snowflake to the treatment room as planned," Eleanor finally said. "The last thing we need is for a wild bobcat to develop an attachment to a domestic animal." As the kitten disappeared from view, Wilder's distress vocalization echoed through the center, a sound so mournful it caused all three humans to exchange troubled glances. That night, Snowflake's condition worsened. His breathing became increasingly labored, and his temperature dropped despite the warming pad beneath him. "I don't think he's going to make it until morning," Melissa told Eleanor around midnight. As they discussed comfort measures, Kayla burst into the office. "Wilder won't stop calling. He hasn't eaten his evening meal, and he's been making that same distress sound since Snowflake was moved away." Melissa straightened suddenly. "What if we try something unorthodox? Maternal presence has been shown to improve survival rates in failing neonates. Heart rate, oxygen levels, temperature regulation, all improve with appropriate physical contact." "You can't possibly be suggesting—" "Not in the same enclosure," Melissa clarified quickly. "But maybe proximity. What if we move Snowflake's incubator near Wilder's enclosure?" Under normal circumstances, Eleanor would have immediately rejected such an unscientific proposal. But with a dying kitten and nothing left to lose, she found herself nodding slowly, strictly as a palliative measure and with constant supervision. What happened over the next 8 hours would eventually be written up in the Journal of Wildlife Rehabilitation as one of the most unusual cases in the publication's history. With careful precautions, Snowflake's incubator was placed just outside Wilder's enclosure. Wilder immediately pressed himself against the mesh as close to the incubator as possible and began producing a deep rumbling purr that resonated through the small space. By 3 a.m., Snowflake's breathing had eased slightly. By dawn, his temperature had stabilized. And by the time the full staff arrived, the kitten was taking formula with previously unseen vigor. "It's remarkable," Melissa said, reviewing Snowflake's vital signs. "I can't explain it medically, but his will to live seems to have strengthened overnight." The staff maintained the unusual arrangement throughout the day. Wilder remained fixated on Snowflake, barely touching his own food. When staff members approached to check on the kitten, the bobcat would growl low in his throat, not aggressively, but with clear warning. "It's like he's appointed himself guardian," Tom observed. "But why?" Eleanor had been pondering this question. "I've been reviewing Wilder's intake information. The location where he was found trapped, the hiker who found him, mentioned finding the remains of an adult female bobcat nearby, apparently killed within the previous 24 hours. The implications settled over the room. "You think Wilder and that female were," Tom began. "Possibly mates, or at least in the same territory," Eleanor supplied. Melissa offered a hypothesis. "Trauma responses in mammals can manifest in unexpected ways. There's research showing that animals who experience loss sometimes transfer attachment behaviors to unlikely subjects." "Whatever the explanation," Eleanor said, "we need to remember our primary mission. Wilder is scheduled for release in less than 2 weeks. We can't allow this unusual behavior to compromise his rehabilitation." As days passed, Snowflake grew stronger. His respiratory infection cleared, he gained weight, and his eyes brightened with the curiosity typical of kittens his age. Wilder's behavior, rather than normalizing over time, became increasingly focused on the kitten. When Snowflake was briefly removed for treatments, the bobcat would pace anxiously until his return. Word of the unusual relationship spread through the wildlife rehabilitation community across Oregon. Opinions were sharply divided. "This is extreme anthropomorphism," argued a visiting wildlife veterinarian. "You're projecting human emotions onto natural behaviors." "Then explain why his cortisol levels drop when the kitten is present," countered Melissa, pointing to blood work results. "Explain why he's only taking full meals when he can see Snowflake." The most compelling moment came when Snowflake, now 4 weeks old and more active, wriggled free from Kayla's grip and tumbled to the floor with a startled squeak. Though unhurt, his frightened cry triggered an immediate response from Wilder, who launched himself against the mesh with such force that the entire enclosure shuddered. The bobcat's vocalization wasn't a predator's call. It was a distress signal that even the most skeptical staff members recognized as concern. That evening, Eleanor sat late in her office. On her desk lay 2 files: Wilder's release assessment paperwork and the transfer forms that would send Snowflake to a cat rescue once he was weaned. Both animals were progressing exactly as they should medically, yet Eleanor found herself troubled by the decisions ahead. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Tom entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Can't sleep either?" Eleanor accepted the coffee gratefully. "I keep telling myself we're following protocol, that this is what's best for them both. But in 30 years of wildlife work, I've never seen a bond like this," Tom said. "Scientifically unexplainable or not, it's real." He leaned forward. "I called Rafael Martinez today. He knows someone, Lisa Townsend. She has a licensed facility on 40 acres just outside Sisters. Specializes in cases like this." "Cases like what exactly?" "Non-releasable predators with special circumstances. She has the permits, the experience, and most importantly, the space to keep them both together." Eleanor felt the weight of professional responsibility pressing against unexpected emotion. "We can't make decisions based on sentimentality. Our job is to return wildlife to the wild whenever possible." "I agree," Tom said carefully. "But our job is also to make decisions based on what will give each animal its best chance at a fulfilling life. The hard question is, what does that mean for Wilder now?" Release day arrived with clear skies and a crisp wind. The transport crate sat ready beside Wilder's enclosure, equipped with everything needed for the journey to the release site. The team gathered for the pre-release briefing, reviewing the carefully selected location. Yet none mentioned the white kitten deliberately kept separate from the day's activities. "All right," Eleanor finally said. "Let's proceed." The plan was straightforward. Dart Wilder with a mild sedative, transfer him to the transport crate, and begin the 2-hour drive to the release site. The procedure began smoothly, with Wilder receiving the sedative and gradually becoming still. As the team opened the enclosure to move him, however, a sound from the main building caught everyone's attention: the distinctive, high-pitched mew of a kitten. Snowflake, despite being in a closed room some distance away, had begun calling loudly. Wilder, though sedated, lifted his head at the sound. His ears swiveled toward the noise, and despite the medication in his system, he attempted to stand. "He's fighting the sedative," Melissa said with concern. "We need to move quickly." The team worked efficiently to transfer the bobcat to the crate, but as they secured the door, his behavior became increasingly distressed. Even through the fog of sedation, Wilder was responding to Snowflake's continued calls, pawing at the crate door and vocalizing in return. Eleanor watched, her professional resolve wavering. According to protocol, they should proceed immediately with transport, yet every instinct told her this was wrong. "Wait," she said finally. "Tom, call Lisa Townsend." Tom looked at her, understanding immediately. "I'm considering all options," Eleanor said. "We need a full reassessment." Later that afternoon, Lisa Townsend arrived, a distinguished woman in her 60s, with sun-weathered skin and calm, evaluating eyes. She had spent 40 years in wildlife rehabilitation, the last 15 focused exclusively on permanently housed predators. "I'd like to observe them together," she said after reviewing both files. Under careful supervision, Snowflake's incubator was once again placed near Wilder's enclosure. The bobcat immediately approached and resumed his protective posture. For over an hour, Lisa observed in silence. "In my professional opinion," she finally said, "you're dealing with a genuine cross-species bond that has become essential to both animals' well-being. Wilder has formed what we might call an alloparental attachment." "Can he still be released?" Eleanor asked. Lisa shook her head. "I wouldn't recommend it. The separation trauma would likely compromise his ability to reintegrate successfully. He might seek out human habitations looking for the kitten, refuse to establish proper territory, or fail to hunt effectively due to stress." She continued, "This isn't about anthropomorphism or sentimentality. It's about recognizing that trauma and attachment exist across species lines. And you have the capacity to take them both?" "I do," Lisa confirmed. "My facility includes several large naturalistic enclosures. Wilder would have nearly an acre of forested space with climbing structures, hunting enrichment, and appropriate shelter. Snowflake could remain with him, with separate access to indoor spaces for his domestic needs." The transfer to Wild Heart Rehabilitation Center took place 2 weeks later. Lisa's facility, nestled in the ponderosa pine forests outside Sisters, provided a compromise between wild freedom and captive security. The Havenwood team watched as Lisa expertly managed the introduction to the new space. "We'll go slowly with full physical contact," Lisa explained, "though given their history, I don't anticipate problems." Before the Havenwood team departed, Lisa invited them to witness one final moment. Under careful supervision, she brought Snowflake into the main enclosure where Wilder waited. The bobcat approached with gentle demeanor, sniffing the kitten thoroughly before beginning to groom his white fur with methodical care. Snowflake, showing no fear, curled against the much larger cat's side. The bobcat circled once before settling around the kitten, one protective paw draped over him. Even Eleanor, the consummate scientist, felt tears well in her eyes. "Sometimes," Lisa said quietly, "our job isn't just to heal physical wounds, but to honor the emotional ones too." 6 months later, Eleanor received a package from Wild Heart Rehabilitation Center. Inside was a photo album and a letter from Lisa detailing Wilder and Snowflake's progress. The photos showed the pair in various settings. Wilder stretched on a high platform with Snowflake perched beside him, both cats investigating an enrichment puzzle. The bobcat watching attentively as the now adolescent domestic cat practiced pouncing. The final page held a printed article titled, "Unlikely Family, the Bobcat Who Adopted a Kitten." The feature had brought national attention to both rehabilitation centers and raised awareness about illegal trapping and its impact on wildlife. "Many people ask me why Wilder chose Snowflake," Lisa wrote. "Scientists might point to displaced nurturing instincts or trauma-induced behavior changes, but everyone who watches them together eventually comes to the same conclusion. What they're witnessing is love, plain and simple. Not human love, perhaps, but something just as genuine, a connection that transcends the boundaries we humans so often try to impose on the natural world." Eleanor placed the album on her office shelf where staff members often paused to look through it during breaks. The rehabilitation center continued its work, rehabilitating and releasing scores of wild animals each year. But the story of Wilder and Snowflake remained a touchstone, a reminder that sometimes healing comes in unexpected forms and that compassion knows no species. At Wild Heart Rehabilitation Center, beneath the ponderosa pines of Central Oregon, a bobcat and a domestic cat continued their improbable life together. Wild and tame, large and small, united by a bond that defied explanation, but touched every heart lucky enough to witness it. When visitors asked Lisa why the bobcat hugged the cat so often, curling around him, grooming him, keeping him close, she would smile and tell them the truth that had brought tears to the eyes of even the most experienced wildlife veterinarians. Because sometimes love is the most powerful medicine of all.